The boomers won't get off Facebook and Gen Z won't go outside. Movies used to be original and now they're just filled with superheroes. So much is changing around me and I'm rapidly turning into a relic of the past. Will I even matter? What's my legacy? I'm only getting older and time is moving faster. There's a new party next door. It's a hotshot director and an up-and-coming actress. Am I going to be invited? I don't know. It's official, old buddy. This is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Hi.
We're here. We're doing this podcast. I'm so excited to be doing it.
Which part? Are you talking about you're excited to be shooting again, or are you excited to be doing this movie in particular?
I'm excited to be back, man. I'm excited to be with you on this table.
I know, you're out of town forever, man.
I was literally gone for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
I know, I got used to it, to be honest.
Yeah. We didn't upload on the reaction channel for like a month straight up. Superbad came out while I was gone. Mm-hmm. It's honestly one of my favorite episodes we've done, so please go check that out. But you edited that without me watching it, or you were on your own for a little bit.
If the episode's absolute garbage, just it's me. I'm the face of it,
Yeah. I listened to it on the plane on my way back to LA. And I actually got to listen to it as a fan because I didn't review and I forgot what I said in the podcast. So I was actually listening to it being like, these guys have something to say about this movie.
You stepped outside of yourself for a little bit.
I'm just going to introduce the podcast for a second and then we're going to get straight into it. This is Movies That Changed Us. I'm Altaf.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to explore how Once Upon a Time in Hollywood changed us. If you're listening to this and don't already know, you can watch us on YouTube at Movies That Changed Us. This is the first time we're doing an intro, so forgive us for being a little rusty on it.
We're a little sloppy on it. I know we're so cocky. We're so used to people already knowing who we are. You know? But we also have a functioning Patreon, so if anyone wants to support us, you can go to patreon.com/nicedudemovienight and you can get early access to episodes with no ads on them and a couple other goodies, so feel free to check it out.
To take it back a little bit to 2019 when this movie was coming out, a Tarantino movie was coming out. I met you in 2017. Very quickly found out about your taste and how much your taste matched mine, specifically Tarantino. And then when a Tarantino movie was coming out in 2019, I think it was like, you and I are going to get to see a Tarantino movie together in theaters. And it's just all very exciting.
Yeah, and to specify how fast you learned about my taste, it was probably within 10 minutes of knowing each other.
Yeah, I asked you if you were a Star Wars fan. You slapped your arm and showed your Han Solo blaster tattoo. It was like we were so 22.
I was gonna say I sound like such a tool when you tell that story,
but it was like the most early 20s thing you could do.
I know.
And so this movie was coming out. We were all very excited. I mean, come on, it was at the time, it was DiCaprio and Brad Pitt in a movie together?
Oh, yeah. And well, even as soon as I heard the title, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I remember you and I talked about that when those little articles came out. Well, what his next movie will be called.
First, when we heard the title, I will say both you and I were like, okay, that's kind of corny. Feels like a Tarantino title, but whatever. And then it was reading about the premise. Leo and Brad Pitt play a movie star and a stuntman that live right next door to Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. And when we read that premise, it was you who looked at me and you were like, okay, that's pretty fucking cool. That's
he's going to have a take on it. And it's interesting though, because I remember reading into this movie more that Sharon Tate's sister was originally not a fan of the concept, just because on paper, Tarantino exploring the Manson family and everything just sounds like, oh God, Tarantino's going to Tarantino it up kind of thing. But as soon as she actually read the script and understood it better, she actually did give her blessings to it.
Yeah, and I was very excited walking into it. You and I both were. We were also in the theater sitting very close to the screen because this theater we were at the time didn't do reserved seating online. So you just kind of walked in and it was, we got there on time. We didn't get there early and it was packed and we were 3 rows away from the screen.
Yeah.
So it was just a packed house. It was a hot crowd, I remember, too. Everyone was just psyched to be there.
Yeah.
It's kind of just I remember Django being that way, too. Just going to go see that. And we were all we're going to see a Tarantino movie. It's always kind of exciting. How would you describe our reaction walking out of the theater that day?
I don't, it was one of those things where I wanted to like it more than I did the first time I watched it.
Yeah.
And I think you probably had the same thing where we were both kind of okay, that was different from his usual movies, And I remember you went back to it a lot faster than I ever did. you rewatched it. How quickly did you rewatch it?
No, I rewatched it in during lockdown, so 2020, so like
So like a year later.
Yeah, basically a year after. Yeah, no, I think like I remember exactly what you said. You were like, I need to think about it, but that's a good thing because it's making me want to think about it.
Yeah.
And I remember you said that, and we both kind of came to that conclusion of just like, huh, that was different than I thought it would be. We definitely, like a lot of people, thought it was going to be more like Manson stuff. I definitely thought there was going to be an actual like plot, a driving story, a narrative, which this movie is more of a day in the life, loose kind of hangout movie than we all expected. And we should have known it's Tarantino, so it's going to be a bit deeper than them just living next to Sharon Tate and the Manson family comes and kills everyone.
Yeah.
I will say though, like we both enjoyed the big moments, right? Like we enjoyed the Rick Dalton coming out with the flamethrower, and both you and I walked out the theater and were just like, Brad Pitt standout. Cliff Booth, that was like the highlight of the movie.
Yeah.
He is like easily the best performance.
We had a very surface level appreciation for it. It's kind of what you're getting at. I think upon rewatch, I think you and I can, especially as you and I get a little bit older, we're not like old, but we're getting older than we were when it first came out.
Well, what we just said, right? I met you when I was 21, you were 22. We were both kind of just like cocky and excited. And now we're doing this podcast as I'm going to turn 28 in this month by the time this comes out.
Exactly. And just for listeners and viewers, just to be clear, we're not going to be here to be like, oh, remember when he burned them alive? Like, there's a lot more to break down in this movie that you and I came around to appreciate a lot more, and I think like, I'm really glad that the movie didn't go super deep into the Manson stuff like we were expecting when we first watched it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like really thankful. I like that the movie didn't even give, the Manson family the grace to like explore them or anything. They made them look like a bunch of stupid hippies.
I know.
Which is what they were,
The reason I wanted to I revisited this movie during lockdown was, one, we were all very sad and wanted to go back to 2019, which will now infamously be known as the year of like, we didn't know how good we had it. And so I wanted to go back to like the quote unquote good times in movies, at least, right? Mm-hmm. And specifically, I just wanted to watch a Tarantino movie again. And I've seen all of his other movies so many times. And I remember on rewatch, now that I knew the movie wasn't this direct plot and I kind of had an idea of what it was about, I kind of started to get slowly a grasp of what Tarantino was trying to do with this movie. And then I just wanted to keep revisiting it. I'm at a point with this movie now where I put this on like someone would put on a Beatles song, where it's just like, it's music to me. Like sometimes when I'm feeling down, I'll put on the Musso and Frank scene. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I know this movie from back to front. I know this movie more than I know like any of his other movies. Like, you can recite Pulp Fiction. I can recite this movie. It's basically, you know how Cliff is in his mobile home when he's watching TV? And it's like, you know how musicians are. They're temperamental cats. And he's just like, yeah. That's how I am. Like, I'm talking alone in my bedroom to this movie.
Just reciting it as it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been trying to get you to be like, dude, you saw it once in theaters. It's basically like you haven't seen it at all. Because there's like, you just gotta let this movie sink in for a second.
Yeah. And I'm glad I did. It took me a while because I was never against it. It was never like a movie that I thought I was, above rewatching kind of thing. It was more of just, I never made the time to.
You're also not a rewatcher. You don't rewatch movies. You don't revisit movies.
Not as often as others, for sure. And that one in particular just took me a while to get to until we started gearing up for this podcast. And I've rewatched it 2 or 3 more times since,
I will say this is the movie that kind of changed my perspective on how to watch movies. And to expand on that a little bit, it used to be, I used to watch a movie and if I didn't like it, I didn't like it. And in my mind, I was like, well, that's just not good. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I'm more prone to be like, let me revisit it. I feel like there's some potential here. I need to watch it again.
Yeah.
And I do that very often now. And it happened because of how much I ended up loving this movie and how it's actually now just one of my favorite movies.
Just of all time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me happy. This movie genuinely makes me happy. And prepping for this podcast, like, I realized why I watch it so much. It's because I think it's the only Tarantino movie out there that I emotionally connect to.
Well, I think it's definitely his most sincere movie. You can feel like his actual DNA in the movie. And don't get me wrong, he puts soul and love and DNA into all of his movies for sure. But a lot of his movies are typically like genre pieces. You know, they're celebrating his love for kung fu movies or for crime films or whatever it is. But this one feels like it means something to him. Like, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it has like real sincerity.
And I mean, because he puts a lot of himself into this movie. From everything with like the Musso and Frank's like scene of them talking about Rick's filmography, right? Tarantino loves thinking about this stuff, like TV stars, old TV stars. Where did they go? What does their filmography look like? What did they do after TV? Or just old movie stars in general. Like if you watch any interview of his, he's listing off names that none of us have heard of, but he talks about it so passionately. And he talks about old movies that we probably haven't heard of so passionately that we end up caring about it. And so he just made a movie where that's what's happening. You know, they're talking about careers, and it's also about the Manson family. But the way he's framing the Manson family is not just like a true crime story. He's framing it in the way of like, look, these are like, this is old school, and they're still in Hollywood, and then they're still trying to like work, and it's happening or not happening for some people. But at the same time, there is this new era coming in, and that includes Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, who's the hotshot director and the hot actress in town, and the Manson family. They're these young hippies that are like in Hollywood, you know? And the shot that says it all is the Manson girls kind of rummaging through the dumpster. And as they're walking past, they walk past a mural of like a TV cowboy with his boots up. And that shot just says it all, you know? And that shows like what Tarantino thinks of LA. He's a guy that shows up on interviews and podcasts talking about movies that the interviewer has probably never heard of. Think about how often he understands that the movies that I'm talking about, I care about, probably no one's ever seen. And no one even cares about it anymore. Or do people even care about movies anymore? Like, he probably feels that way.
Yeah, well, his relationship is very different with that sort of thing. And even outside of movies, within Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there's like a lot of tiny little, you know, products you can see that they use. You know what I'm saying? Like just all the different restaurants and just the vibe that they have, so many just kind of forgotten relics and even old commercials for TV shows that no one thinks about anymore.
He's very open about what he loves. And that's not just Kurosawa movies. That is like old Western TV shows that he even admits on interviews. He was like, yeah, they were kind of crap, but like I grew up with them. But no other like filmmaker would highlight the crappy TV show they watched when they were a kid, but he does.
Yeah. And I think like it's very much kind of this bittersweet, I guess, like, it sounds corny to say, but love letter to that time and to the things that he loves that like people don't really care about, and kind of losing control of that like, oh, I guess culture just doesn't care about this thing that I really care about anymore. You know, we're all kind of moving on from it.
Yeah. And like, I feel that to an extent, being a movie lover now, right? I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but like, you know, there's a lot of this like talk about Memorial Day weekend box office projections, right? And I'm having this moment where I'm talking to friends, and some of my friends are just like, yeah, the last movie I saw in theaters was Endgame or something like that. Realizing that, oh yeah, going to a movie theater isn't the thing to do on a Friday night anymore. But that's like my favorite thing to do. And I thought that was like a big cultural thing, and now it's becoming more niche. And so you feel that slipping away from you sometimes, but we're still in LA where those things are being made. And that's the feeling this movie gives me, like, is that like, it's still Hollywood, but it's changing rapidly.
Yeah. And it's crazy that like, that never stops. You know what I mean?
That was happening in 1969.
It happened before 1969.
And it was happening before when like sound, like from silent to sound.
And radio shows used to be a thing. I mean, the song by Queen, Radio Gaga, is all about that. It's like a love letter to how radio used to be the thing. How families would gather around the radio to listen to the next series, you know, the next serial thing or the next radio play.
Yeah.
And that's just a completely gone era, but that was the thing. And it kind of ascended into podcast now, obviously. But there was a time when that was just the normal way of consuming storytelling and media.
That I mean, 100%. So I want to focus this conversation on like three big sequences, and we'll probably get to like a lot of other stuff. But three sequences that I feel like are just telling what this movie's about. The Musso and Frank sequence, the Spawn Ranch stuff, and then I had a third one. What was it? Sharon Tate watching her own movie.
Yeah.
I feel like those three things you can take out and like that's the movie, right?
Sure. I like how it doesn't even include the ending, which is like the thing that everyone talks about, right? Just the
But
big.
we'll talk
We'll
about
get
the
to
ending.
it. Yeah, I know. I totally hear you, but it's just funny because like the essence of the movie isn't even fully the ending. You know?
Yeah, I mean, the ending is kind of revealing the cards of the movie of like what it was actually trying to say.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of just like that conclusion of like, you idiot, it was never about this. It was about this. It's about Rick like hugging Sharon Tate and them inviting him in. You know what I mean? Anyways, I want to, before I get to Musso and Frank's, just give me a big picture. You watched it again, and then you watched it again after that to prep for this podcast. You watched it twice to prep. What are your feelings like now?
Oh, I love it now. Yeah, I think it's different to me, the relationship I have with it, but it's a more mature relationship. It's a relationship I have with the movie that I value a little bit more, because, and like you mentioned it in passing, but, Pulp Fiction is one of my favorite movies of all time. Ooh, Pulp Fiction is my favorite movie. That's a unique take, Chris. But like, that's another movie I can recite. I've gone to screenings of that movie and I look into it a little deeper. I try to, at least, than just the cool dialogue.
Yeah. And you can look at, I mean, it's not like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the only Tarantino movie that has deep emotional themes.
Absolutely.
But it's the one that I connect to the most. That's just the distinction I want to make.
I would argue it's his most mature movie, and that's okay. That's not me judging his other films, but
Jackie Brown is up there.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. You get the point, though. I'm a big fan of his movies. I have a whole box set of his Blu-rays all together.
Yeah.
And
isn't it hard to talk about how you're a Tarantino fan? Like it's tough a little bit.
It's a whole rabbit hole that it feels like everyone gets it. So I kind of want to. You guys get the deal. We're film people. We like Tarantino. Cool.
But it's funny, right?
We're past that,
But it's funny. You're also like, there's also this level of like, I don't want to talk about how much I love Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, no, totally. I just feel weird. I feel like I'm that guy,
Totally. But it's like, you know what the thing is? Like, yeah, Tarantino fans now have this like, it's synonymous with the toxic film bro culture. Mm-hmm. But his movies are also really good. So we gotta, like, there's a separation there. Anyways, but go ahead.
Yeah, so like I said, I think there is something a lot more like midlife crisis-y about this one, which you and I have neither truly hit. We've had quarter life crisis, which is close,
Yeah.
But I think there's a relatability that you and I both have, and I think you and I kind of face it in different ways for sure, but I'd love to kind of get into it with you, like how it connects with you, how it speaks to you, because I know you've talked to me a lot about different ways that you relate to the character of Rick Dalton.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's why I keep coming back to this movie. So I think, cool. Now, I think this is where we can get into Musso and Frank's, because this is how we get into Rick a little bit as well. I'm trying my best not to go frame by frame in this movie because it's just like the opening lives in my head.
Do you want me to kind of just run through it then, just so that way you don't get lost?
Yes.
So, yeah, we open on a fun, quirky little interview, for bounty law between Rick and Cliff. And it's like, and if you think you're seeing double, well, in a way you kind of are, or whatever he says,
And it's Tarantino both like having this like fun opening of an old interview, but also explaining to the audience like what this relationship is.
It summarizes it really simply when it's like, you carry his load, or whatever he says.
It's just like, is that right, Cliff? You carry his load? Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get the gist immediately. Then they both drive together and it follows them around driving and it's all cool.
And you also get their dynamic of just like, oh yeah, Cliff he's not the talker in this relationship.
Yeah.
He'll butt in for one line.
He's the low maintenance one.
I remember Jay from Red Letter Media pointed out how like seeing that yellow text pop up just felt like, oh, you're home.
I know, right?
But then it's like, it's cutting back and forth from Cliff and Rick driving to Musso and Frank's, but then also to like kind of everyone arriving, right? Like Sharon and Roman arriving to LA. They're in the airport and everything. And it's just like this propulsive sequence of everyone's here.
It's establishing the world too that we're in and the vibes. that we're getting. We're probably going to use that word a lot, is vibes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the shot of them both entering Musso and Franks at the same time. That was the trailer money shot, right? Of just like, it was Tarantino's version of like a big MCU action sequence that would show up in a trailer of like, this is what you're going to go into theater for. It's Brad Pitt, Leo entering Musso and Franks, where you're like, oh, yeah, they're both in the same movie. This is going to be fucking cool. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh, yeah, totally. And then next thing you know, we get you know who.
Are you, who are you?
Al Pacino. I was trying to. You know who? Come on, you know this one. Finish it for me, dude.
First of all, it's so Musso and Franks. The fact that he said it in Musso and Franks, embarrassingly, I've lived in LA for 7 years now. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about Musso and Franks until this movie.
Yeah,
which is wild because it's such a big LA staple, and people, it's still there. You can go there. From what I've heard, it's more for like a drinks vibe. Like the food's good, but it might be so overpriced for some people. It's more for just like the vibes and getting a drink.
The experience of it, yeah, the atmosphere.
And it's also just been around forever. You get to learn that so many celebrities have dined there.
I want to say I went there when I was like 12.
Yeah, I need to go. I've had this thought of like on my 30th birthday, I'll go there.
Why on your 30th?
Just like, I just wanted to make it special.
Well, what's special about turning 30?
I don't know.
No, let's focus on that first.
Well, it's going to be depressing either way, so I want to be a little bit happier.
But you're waiting like 2 years. Yeah, I gotcha. I was just curious, you know.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Anyways, but setting it at Musso and Franks is immediately such like it's Tarantino knowing like it's important to have it here.
Yeah, of course.
This is LA. It's like important to have it here. And it's funny, in the book, this like the novelization, which I have in my hand, if you're watching this on YouTube right here, I've read the whole thing twice. And the novelization, it opens with this scene with Al Pacino and Rick Dalton.
Okay. But
they're in Marvin Short's office. And Tarantino said that, like, when I was writing the movie, I was like, well, we can't have it open of them in an office. You got to go to Musso and Franks. That's a movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
And that's what makes Tarantino special. He just knows that, like,
what's cinematic and what isn't. And yeah, you know.
We see the shot of like the drinks. Like, it's another like thing of that he loves doing, of just like Cliff's going to have a Bloody Mary that he's putting hot sauce into, and Rick has like a whiskey sour. The addition of a whiskey sour is perfect because it's such a sugary drink that you can take down really quick.
Yeah, it's nice and simple too. It's easy to make. Bloody Mary's like just quick highlight moment. I don't like the idea of Bloody Marys. I don't like the idea of savory drinks.
Sure.
Anytime I hear there's like fucking shrimp or tomatoes or anything like it, what? I'm not putting that in my mouth.
Tomato, especially. Like, I like tomatoes, but not in like liquid form. Like, I hate tomato soup.
Oh, you ever have a clamato, by the way?
Never want to.
Have you heard of it?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? I gagged immediately.
Like, I never want to have it.
I got like a fake pseudo punishment when I was in high school for forgetting to turn in a late assignment, and as a punishment, he had me drink clamato.
That's pretty good.
And so I drank it, and it wasn't fun.
You know, I say that I don't like tomato in like liquid form, but I eat I'm Indian. I eat Indian food, and a lot of it is tomato in liquid form.
I guess like paste and sauce is a little different than like juice and drinking it out of a cup.
That's true.
You know what I mean? If it's like used as like a gravy on chicken, that's one thing, but
we can't just stay on like what they're drinking. We have to move on. But Al Pacino enters, which was another thing about this movie, knowing that Al Pacino was going to be in a Tarantino movie.
Oh, yeah, dude.
And I don't know what I expected, but when I first saw this in theaters, I was mildly disappointed that it was just them sitting in Musso and Franks, which is such a ridiculous statement because Al Pacino is like pitch perfect in this movie, and he's perfectly casted, and this is my favorite scene in the movie. Just straight up. This is the scene I watch when I'm upset. Like, this is the scene when I'm feeling down, I put on this scene.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. Sorry that I bumped the mic. But it's so interesting to me because it's a good scene, but it just kind of went in one ear and out the other. Even the rewatching was, that was a good scene, cool. And
really?
Yeah, it was just, to me, I saw it as just a scene. And that's not me saying it's bad by any means. It's awesome, but it didn't like stick with me the way it sticks with you. So I'd love for you to kind of elaborate on that.
I think, okay. I think you'll understand why too. This scene is about just Rick's career. It's breaking it down for the audience, the big exposition scene, but it's also immediately getting to the central conflict of the movie, is that Rick is playing a lot of heavies And he's realized, oh, that's the network's way of basically edging him out and bringing the new blood in.
Yeah, it's a really cool scene how he walks him through, and then he ends up just explaining how psychologically to how it works. Like, I'm not going to see you just playing the heavy. I'm going to see this new guy beating the shit out of
Jake Cahill.
Jake Cahill, yeah.
But it's also, you get to see, and this is where like just the movie has life in it, where he's like, the double feature, that's flattering and embarrassing. What'd you watch? And he's like, Tanner and 14 Assists of McCluskey.
Yeah.
And now these two things have just basically, they feel like real movies. Like, because the movie became such a big hit and like in the culture, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood became such a big thing. Like, Tarantino's talked about, he's like, the best thing to happen is that people treat Rick Dalton's filmography as a real filmography. Like, I remember 14 Fists of McCluskey. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It feels like a real thing that you have fondness over.
And also that scene of just like, fry, you Nazi bastard.
I know, there's a lot of little, I mean, Tarantino likes to do this, obviously, but there's a lot of little cutaways that are really interesting.
Bounty Law is the obvious one.
Yeah, and obviously once we start focusing on Cliff, there's we'll get to that stuff. But I think though, like the language of this movie, it has this kind of like almost like an unreliable narrator aspect to it. You know how like once, you know how there's that random part when it just cuts in the middle of him talking when they're on set?
Yes.
And
yeah, when he's talking to Timothy Olyphant.
Timothy Olyphant, yeah. Because at least for me, and we don't have to get fully distracted into it, but like I always took it as like not a literal interpretation, but like it's just, like we said, just the vibes that it just has this uneasy aura of like legacy, maybe not meeting exactly what you thought it was.
Yeah, these stories that we have to continuously tell, and they're kind of being molded. So, okay, so just to stay focused for a second.
Yeah.
The reason why this scene speaks to me so much, and the reason why I love it, is not just because of Al Pacino and the way he's delivering it, but it's specifically Leo's performance. I've thought about this real hard, and I think this might be my favorite Leonardo DiCaprio performance
of all time.
Of all time.
Okay.
And I don't want to say best because that's weird, but like it might be my favorite because it's the little things he's doing that I relate to so hard. In this scene, once, like, it's his slouch. Like, when Al Pacino's kind of breaking him down of, like, this is your career and this is what's going wrong, you see him kind of slouching. You see him continuously drinking water. When it cuts to him drinking water, that's the shot I love. He, like, it stays on him for a little too long where he's, like, chugging that water. And I'm like, oh, man, that's, like, anxiety. That's so relatable.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's psychological, like picking up on it, but I can understand because like you and I are kind of opposite. Sometimes I'm usually pretty easygoing when it comes to bad things happening or getting bad news or life taking us in a different direction or things changing, and so it doesn't hit me the same way. The anxiety aspect, like things that make me anxious, are very different probably than the things that make you anxious.
And yeah, 1,000%, of course, but like, I think when I saw his body language in that scene, a second and third and fourth and fifth time I watched this, and even now, I was like, oh my God, he's doing me.
You're Leonardo DiCaprio, man.
I have a tendency to like, I mean, this is just like anxious stuff, right? This is like anxiety 101, but it's just like, I have a tendency to kind of just like have my hands together and tightly rub them together. I slouch a lot. I use like, I need to have a bottle of water and I will drink that entire bottle of water while we're having a meeting.
Yeah.
Like, I need something to do with my hands at all times. And like, his whole thing, even when he's talking to Sam Wanamaker, the director, how he's always like, just like in the middle of something. He has his face in the bowl of ice. And that's obviously because he's like dead hungover, but he has a cigarette. He's coughing. He's sweaty. Like
he's always like doing stuff to his body.
Yeah. And it's like, he's a guy that needs to be doing stuff with his hands. And I just have never felt connected to a Tarantino character like that before until this movie.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really cool, though. It feels like it kind of I'm sure it speaks to a lot of other people in different ways, too.
That's why this scene spoke to me so hard.
Yeah.
And they walk out, and this is, again, a trailer moment that we all had seen a million times before going to see this movie, of him, like, smoking a cigarette, Cliff getting a key from the valet, and just being like, so what happened? What did he say? He's like, I said, oh, buddy, I'm a has-been.
Yeah.
And then he immediately starts crying, puts his head on his shoulders, like, sorry about that.
I know, I know, and you can tell Cliff is like, whoa, okay, get off me, buddy.
No, but also helping him out. He's like, here, don't cry in front of the Mexicans.
Such a strange line. But even like the fact that I also love the touch, rewatching it too, I noticed this detail, that when he gets in the car in the passenger seat, you know how he's like, I gotta perform my talent, goddamn fucking movies, and you realize the valet guy was in there. Like, he just had that meltdown right in front of the valet
And the valet guy's like awkwardly walking out. Yeah. When they both get in the car, it's you hear Rick pathetically say, "It's like, take me home, Cliff." Like he's this cowboy that got wounded. Like, which is the whole thing about Rick, right? This is where we can get a little bit into it. Is he doesn't know how good he has it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think Tarantino said that about him, is like, Tarantino said, if you like zoom out and look at Rick's career, he's actually got it pretty good. He's got a house on the Hollywood Hills. He had a successful TV show. And sure, his movie career didn't go where he thought it was going to go, to that Steve McQueen level.
Yeah.
But he's working in Hollywood and has a lot of friends and still gets work. Like, that's more than what a lot of people can say.
Yeah, he's not really chasing like the things that typically should mean a lot to you to give you a valuable life. And this is a very LA thing. Right. And a lot of people still to this day chase the wrong things, quote unquote.
Right. We all can fall under that trap. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you and I, like, I think it's safe to say you and I have no idea how long we're going to stay relevant. I wouldn't even call us relevant, but you get what I'm saying, right? There might come a day when we just become a little bit washed up, 10 years from now.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, like, you gotta set your priorities straight of like what really matters.
Yeah, exactly. I have all 10 fingers. I have all 10 toes. I have a friend I love. I have a girlfriend I love.
And am I still able to like work? Maybe not at the same capacity that I was before, but am I still able to make a living? Yeah. And maybe it's not as much money as I used to make before, but am I still happy? Those are all the things that Rick is not asking himself.
No.
It's that beautiful like moment that, again, this is another part that I connect to so heavily. And this is where I think after this, we can switch a little bit to Cliff.
Okay.
When they drive up Cielo Drive, and you get that shot of Cielo Drive too. It's like this ominous shot too. You get that drive to Cielo Drive, they park, and suddenly you see Sharon and Roman kind of whiz by. And like Rick is looking at them, like just clocking them, really being like, oh my God. And then he's like, holy shit, you know what that was? That was Roman Polanski, director of Rosemary's Baby. Immediately switches to be like, oh my God. And then he walks out the car, and I love Cliff's face. It's Cliff just having this like smirk, just being like, oh, there he goes. He's good again. Yeah. And it's also just like, you could tell Rick does this every day. He has a meltdown, has a glimmer of hope, and he's like, immediately he's like, that's what Eddie O'Brien taught me. You got to have real estate in Hollywood, And you don't got to rent. You got to fucking live here. Yeah. And Cliff's like, so you're good? And he's like, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Immediately switches. But sorry, really quickly. But that's like, I relate to that so heavily. The amount of times I've come to being like, our channel's failing, everything's burning just because of like one video going wrong. And the moment we get like a ton of comments saying that like, this is one of my favorite videos, I'm just like, dude, we're doing something great here.
It's a cycle, where the thing, and for Rick too, what is it that excites him, that makes him feel better? It's status, right? He lives next to Roman Polanski, like a hot shot. He's like, wow, I'm in the same vicinity. I'm cool now. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's clearly what he gets off on. That's like the junk food, the sugar he chases.
And it's like, and he's
he doesn't go deeper.
He doesn't go deeper. And also, but it's also this like very real thing that I go through sometimes of just like having, and guys, I'm going to therapy. Like, but having a meltdown over your career, finding something that can switch it and immediately be like, what was I worried about? And like that happening a lot. And but on the side, and this is where we can get into Cliff, and I want you to talk about this a little bit too, but on the side, if you have a friend that's basically it's not that bad friend, then you can kind of make it through. I feel like you're my it's not that bad friend.
Yeah, that's fair.
You're not a complete, like, and I don't think you would oppose to this. I don't think you're a complete, like, easygoing Cliff Booth type of guy, but I feel like you're the comp for me for that.
100%. Yeah. That's how you and I kind of function sometimes, where I think sometimes it can be an overcorrection. Sometimes I'm not worried about things that I should be worried about. Absolutely. But I do think that, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like just books I've read, whatever, but sometimes I don't worry as quickly as other people, And I think it might just come from a place of like sometimes it's fun to just ride the wave of what happens. Otherwise, to me, I'm like, that's so unrealistic to expect life to just be like up, 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 up all the time.
Yeah, and I think what became so like attractive to people about Cliff, Cliff was a character that immediately everyone fell in love with.
Yeah.
It was also just kind of, it was not a comeback for Brad Pitt, but it was kind of this like rejuvenation for Brad Pitt of just like, we all suddenly realized that we took him for granted and we were like, oh yeah, this guy's one of our best.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason why we all loved Cliff Booth was because it's the guy we want to be. It's not just handsome, but also the guy that just like, I don't know, I got my dog in a mobile home, but I'm kind of happy. We're watching TV and it's kind of great.
Yeah, he has everything he needs. You know, he's perfectly content with that. And like even the nature of his job being a stuntman, where he's not the face of it, but he still, and that's kind of the joke. He carries his load, right? He does all the physically strenuous stuff. You know, he does the dangerous shit. But yeah. Rick's the one that gets the glory and gets all the fame and whatever, all that. He gets invited to the party at the end of the movie. Even.
It's literally the shot of them coming back from Italy and him with his new wife, and then it slowly pans over to Brad Pitt literally carrying his load.
Yeah, exactly. He's just pushing, but he doesn't complain, right? And he even says, like, when he's driving, he's like, I don't complain. I like driving you around, but I just want to let you know.
Yeah, and he like, because he knows what's happened to him, and it's like, he doesn't really expect anything. Yeah. You know, Brad Pitt's talked about how much he loves the ethos that Quentin Tarantino gave this character, which was like expects the worst, so you're never disappointed, kind of like, you know what I mean? Just go into a room just being like, all right, well, I mean, things are already kind of fucked. So like,
yeah, exactly.
And it's that vibe immediately when you see him at the bar, just like he's in the corner having his drink. And he'll wait for Boss Man to finish up the meeting, and then Boss Man will have his freak out. And in the car, he's like, I don't know, going to Italy doesn't seem that bad.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the fate worse than death. You seem to be making it out to me.
Like, I got to do fucking Italian movies. Like, oh yeah, how many you seen? 1, 2? Which, that, again, is so, like, you've had that conversation with me. Not to do a direct comp of just like, okay, really, how bad is it, man?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things I've learned, and I'm sure you've probably talked about, is like, when you're worried about that thing, is you have to kind of mentally confront that thing. Like, okay, what's the worst possible thing that could happen that you're worrying about? You know, confront that. What is the worst thing? Can you live with that? You know what I mean? Like, oh, I can get through that. Okay, that's not that bad.
Yeah. And can I tell a quick story?
Sure. Yeah.
So 2020, funny enough that that was the year that I also revisited this movie and got appreciation for it, was when I also realized that I was going bald. And And when I look back at pictures of 2019, I kind of saw the receding hairline, but I have alopecia, so it was more than just like a receding hairline. It was like spots of my hair were disappearing, and I was going bald. And I was kind of always cocky and proud about my hair. Like, I was the guy that woke up and never had to put gel on and would just have this pompadour.
Oh yeah, well we'll pop up some pictures, but I was always like stunned by how naturally your hair was just flowing and thick.
Yeah, and 2020 was when I was like, wow, I'm losing this. And I freaked out, naturally, like how, like, it's whatever. And I think the thing I said to you, I came in the room, I'm like, dude, look at this. And you're like, oh yeah. And I was like, damn it, man.
Just give yourself some credit. You were stressed and we were going through COVID cooped up alone and you were losing your hair. It's okay to have a little freak out over it.
That's fair. But I was kind of just like freaking out about it. And I went to you and I was just like, man, in a very Rick Dalton way, I was like, my hair's all I had.
Yeah, you were saying, you're like, my hair was the one thing that I had, man.
Because I was, I was single. I still am single, but I was kind of down and out about being
ladies.
Yeah. I was down and out about being single. It was, like you said, it was lockdown. I was feeling lonely, and also just like nothing was really going on with my career. Nice Dude wasn't where it is now,
Yeah.
We hadn't even done reactions regularly yet. And I was like, my hair's all I had, And I think you said in a joking way, but that really snapped me out of it so quick, where you were like, really, how far did it get you?
I was like, look where we are. What, your hair was growing our channel, getting all the ladies? What are you talking about?
You're still in a 2-bedroom apartment living with 3 other people. You share a room with me. And that's a moment that, like, out of context might seem mean to someone, but to me, that was like the thing, and I've credited to you this many times to your face, but that's the reason I just went for it and shaved my head. And like, I was like, all right, I'll be bald. And I was like, I never looked back and I never felt insecure about it. Ever since then, I've never once felt insecure about being bald.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes people have told me, why don't you get this toupee? Why don't you get this hair treatment? Why don't you do plugs or whatever? And I never want to, because I actually now like how I look. Nothing against people that do those treatments or do want to like cover that up in a certain way. But for me, I gained this confidence through that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, looking at this movie, that's kind of what Cliff is doing with Rick, of just being like, it's always Cliff butting in with one line that kind of takes Rick out of it. Hey, you're Rick fucking Dalton. Don't you forget it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's my buddy. I got you. Don't worry about
He
it.
basically takes Rick out of his head a little bit for like a second. You know, and he
Yeah.
kind of reaches and pulls him out. Like, hey man, you're cool. Go back in.
You've done that to me so many times. And male friendship in movies is a thing that I just love. And like, I love that being explored. Bromances. I love that
That's
being
why we did
explored.
Superbad for the last show.
Exactly. But this movie specifically, in like what you've done for me as a friend and how I am as a friend and our relationship as friends of just like, we just got each other no matter where life takes us. We just got each other.
That's the thing. Yeah. I'm like, to me, you know, when it comes to worrying about nice dude and all this stuff, I'm like, I would rather just be friends with you at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? Like, if that part's lost, I don't want to shoot. You know, if you're not happy or if I'm not happy doing this, I don't want to do it anymore. That's it.
It's the moment. It's the moment that I love is just like, hey, you want to come in and watch my FBI? It's like, well, hell, I thought we would. The six pack in the back thought we'd order a pizza. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. And it's them watching TV. And obviously it birthed the iconic Leo meme, whistling and pointing at the TV.
Yeah, of course.
But it's also them watching it. And like Leo comes in, his entrance comes in, and immediately they both start laughing because it's kind of silly. It's like, I'm on TV. But then they like break through the glass and there's a shot of a Leo breaking through the glass and you just hear Cliff.
Yeah, he's like, I like that shot.
And I think you and I just have quoted that so often. And I'm like, people have seen it through our reaction videos, but even when we're not like, you know, putting on a performance or whatever you want to call it in a reaction video, when you and I are just watching a movie on our own, like we watched Barbarian recently just for fun.
Yeah.
And there's a pretty wacky Sam Raimi style shot in there. And you and I were both like, oh, I like that shot. So it's just,
it gets it right. It gets it. You know what I mean? It understands what it's like to kind of like how that dynamic works, why they find value in each other.
I think Chris Stuckman talked about how like there's scenes in this movie where you're just watching the characters watch TV and it's so engaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so hard to pull
It's
it
all
off.
vibes. It's all vibes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, do you want to move on to Spawn Ranch?
Sure.
I think this is kind of the framework for where we talk about the Manson family a little bit. Like I said earlier in this podcast, the Manson family, the way he uses it is kind of different than what we expected. The way he uses the Manson family and the girls and all that stuff, he uses it with the intention of framing like how this new era is coming into LA while this old era is kind of withering away. And Spawn Ranch is like it's the thing that basically says that. But he picks up Pussycat. And you know who is hanging out with Pussycat on that bench?
Who?
Sydney Sweeney.
Oh, that was Sydney Sweeney. Yeah, I knew she was in it, but I can't remember if she was in that scene or not.
That's another thing about this movie. It just like, not only does it have some of the biggest movie stars, it kind of launched a lot of stars.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Mikey Madison's going to be in a Sean Baker movie. Mikey Madison's the girl in the Manson family who does the, I have an idea, man.
She was the one who got like mauled by the dog mostly.
She's the one that and also
And
got
got
lit on fire.
Yeah, who had like the worst, most theatrical death.
Yeah, she was also in the new Scream movie, I've heard. Anyways, but picks up Margaret Qualley, and there's that scene of them driving to Spawn Ranch. What do you think of that scene?
Oh, you were cueing me. I thought you were just walking through the scene.
No, just like, what's the vibe here for you during this part of the movie? I remember in the theater, I was feeling like, okay, what are we doing here with this movie?
I was curious about it because I haven't done a lot of research into the Manson murders or a lot of that, time.
The reason I wanted to ask you is because you are someone that like, not likes true crime in the white girl Netflix way, but like you do like looking into those cases on YouTube or stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I haven't looked a lot into the Manson family stuff, so I was interested in how Tarantino was going to approach something like that, because he's already done Nazi Germany, so on paper, I'm curious how he'd portray this, but
Yeah, Inglourious Bastards is an interesting like comp to this movie just because of like what he does with the ending. But yeah,
Yeah, the way he kind of plays around with history and kind of does his own revisionist fantasy
yeah,
of it. And I think I always love the way the movie portrays the entire, just all of that, because like we already said, Charles Manson himself gets a tiny little cameo, essentially. You know, he gets one short scene, barely a couple lines, and you think he's like, ooh, the movie's building up to him. But no, it doesn't glorify him with that. And I like that it does that because I think I get worried. And like you said, I do look into true crime, but not a lot of serial killer stuff. Like sometimes I do.
that's why I specified not in the white girl Netflix way.
Yeah, but what I was going to say, though, is that like sometimes people's fascination with serial killers does worry me about like just about us as a society, because we don't talk a lot about just like the victims themselves and the people that were actually affected by their actions. They look at them as like, ooh, look at this guy. He dressed up as a clown, John Wayne Gacy, yada, yada.
Yeah, like mythologizing them.
Very much mythologizing. That's the word I'm looking for. And I'm not saying we shouldn't look into it at all, because I think it is important to acknowledge history and to acknowledge real dark pieces of our...
See the patterns.
Yeah, see the patterns so we can learn how to dismantle. And nowadays, especially, like, it's hard to be a serial killer because of how much forensics have advanced, But, I like that the movie doesn't, like I said, mythologize Charles Manson or do this big performance out of him. It's like, no, we're going to give him a tiny little scene, make the hippies look incredibly incompetent, and give them the most humiliating deaths possible.
Well, that's towards the ending.
Towards the end, but even during the Spawn Ranch stuff, they all look like a bunch of fucking weirdos.
Well, what I like, yeah. So what I like about it is that towards the, like, as the movie's chugging along and you're getting these quick glimpses at Manson and the family and all that stuff, you look at them the way they were. Rick Dalton, as he says so eloquently throughout the movie, those fucking hippies, but they were like these guys that would just hitchhike, or these girls that would just hitchhike their way back and dumpster dive, get food out there, live their own lives, sing songs, right? That was like kind of the myth of that was a myth in the romanticized version of them. When we get to Spawn Ranch, though, that's when things get a little scary. That's when things get a little ominous, and now you're just like, okay, wait a second. Like, is Cliff about to die?
Yeah, the way they're all staring at him.
When I was in the theater, I thought he was going to die. Like, straight up. All thanks to just fucking Dakota Fanning bringing in such heat.
I know. I remember how surprised I was. Like, oh shit, Dakota Fanning's in this.
We all were in the theater just being like, yeah, oh wow. And she is amazing. Like, go check who he is.
Yeah.
He's just like, you might want to shake him. I fucked his brains out.
I know. It was like, what a weird...
Not just weird, but it's terrifying.
Yeah.
In the book, there's a whole like chapter about like why that character ended up taking care of George Spahn. Charles basically needed a girl to kind of like watch after George Spahn to make sure he doesn't cause any ruckus and lets them stay there.
Yeah. Which is what really happens.
And Charles is just like, you're going to have to fuck him. That's just what you're going to have to do. And she's like, okay, God damn it. Okay. And then Tarantino wrote the chapter is like, but then something peculiar happened. She started to fall in love with the old man. And like she actually like is in love with him. And that's the thing that's kind of like funny about that scene is that everything she says is true. He is taking a nap because they're going to be watching an episode of FBI.
Yeah. This is their little weird routine that they have.
And it's also this weird connectivity too, is like they're going to be watching an episode of FBI that Rick is starring in later, that Cliff and Rick are going to be watching later that day.
Yeah, and it's effective too because like if you know the history, you know that George Spahn was alive during that time. If you haven't, you're suspicious like, oh, did they kill him? Because they're like, oh, you can't see him right now.
Yeah.
But even then, even if you knew the history and watched it, it's still effective suspense because you know that Tarantino habitually revises history and changes stuff all the time.
So you're like, what's going on?
You don't fully trust him to be accurate historically.
Now, I'm jumping around a lot. I just really want to quickly shout out Brad Pitt's brilliant line delivery when Lena Dunham pops up.
Yeah.
And she's like, we love our precious pussy. And Cliff's like, yes, we do.
I know.
That got a huge laugh in the theater. That was really good. Anyways, he sees Bruce Dern, and one of the funniest scenes in the movie.
Shout out to that scene. I know, he's so good. Wait, Bruce Dern has no idea what's going on or who Cliff is.
He was just like, what about that redhead? He's like, he's like, didn't you hear me? I'm blind. How would I know what the girl's hair is that I'm talking to all the time? But I think what really touches me about that scene emotionally, and I want to get back to the themes of the movie that I connect to with it at least, and is it's that scene is basically two guys that are a part of a bygone era in Hollywood struggling to reconnect.
Being taken advantage of. Thanks, man.
I got you, buddy.
I don't know if that was on camera, but there was a tiny little gnat on my hand, and Altaf straight up slapped it on my hand.
And at that moment, I was your Cliff Booth.
That's right. See, you're carrying my load now, you know?
Oh, yeah, anytime. But it's these two guys of a bygone era in Hollywood that used to work together, struggling to reconnect.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
the core of it.
While being taken advantage of by the young people.
Yeah.
Too.
And I'm just like, oh, these people are ruling this town, and no one really cares about us. And Cliff just wanted to check in on his friend, but he realizes that his friend, the thing that's kind of sad and also very true is like the only way you can survive is to adapt.
Yeah.
George is hanging out with Squeaky, and he's happy there, and he's like, this is my life. And Cliff knows this is wrong. He even says as he's walking out, he's like, everything all right? He's like, I wouldn't call it that or whatever. It's just like, he knows this is fucked up, but he's like, I can't do anything about it. Yeah. He's basically, he's fucking Squeaky and he's fine, whatever. But it's like, this is still sad.
No, totally. Yeah. Especially who was once a respected person in the industry.
Who owned this movie ranch.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this movie ranch is now like filled with hippies. Shout out to Margaret Qualley. You're the blind one.
Oh, yeah, everyone's yelling at him at this point while he's leaving.
Yeah, and then it becomes scary again, too. Just like the way she yells, everyone starts yelling and the music's kind of pumping, and you feel the tension.
Yeah, 100%. You don't know what's going to happen.
And then in a movie that doesn't have that many action sequences besides the cutaways to Rick, you get like your first big Cliff punch moment.
Yeah, because at this point they built up what he's capable of. The fact that people in the industry are afraid of him. Obviously the whole scene with Kurt Russell and Bruce Lee, we haven't even touched it. There's so much to go over in this movie.
We might not even, because like a lot of people have already touched it, but like it's hard to talk about this entire movie.
Totally, but point is I'm acknowledging in regards to the Spawn Ranch scene of how they built up his physical prowess, that he's a stunt guy, he may have or may not have beat up Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
And so when you see that a bunch of hippies are not a threat to him.
And also Cliff is a type of guy that doesn't like raise his voice until he needs to. So when he does, he means business. Yeah. Like even when he's like talking to Dakota Fanning, he's like, this thing right here is not going to stop me. It's so good.
I know.
And Dakota Fanning's kind of impressed by him. He's like, all right, go check. But yeah, he sees the guy doing that weird laugh. And he's like,
messed up teeth.
But the first punch, you see that shot of his feet lifting off.
Yeah, he punches him so hard. He floated in the air for a second.
My favorite cut is all the girls being like, I'm so sorry, I love you.
He's a flower.
Sundance, go get Tex.
I know. Then we got Austin Butler, too. Speaking of, star-making performances.
Well, Stars being launched.
Stars being launched, not star-making, but
I think the star-making performance was, he was doing Elvis.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is weird to see Austin Butler in this movie.
Which is a weird, it adds more to the themes, though, of, the next coming up generations going out to kill it. Because, Austin Butler, everyone talks about as, the new Brad Pitt. And Tarantino didn't do that intentionally, obviously.
But then there's a scene where him and Brad Pitt are literally pointing towards each other. Yeah. And now when you watch this movie, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
But, yeah, what does that, what's the whole point of that, you think?
Which part?
Of Cliff getting the upper hand, punching him. Why is that scene there, you think?
I mean, there's a couple things. On a surface level, it's kind of the wish fulfillment aspect. It's the power fantasy of seeing the Manson family get beat up and seeing them as
kind of pathetic.
Yeah, kind of pathetic because, again, like we said, they've been mythologized as these big, dangerous, dark time in our history. And this movie is trying to make a point that, they were fucking losers that took advantage of innocent people.
Yeah.
That broke into their house with knives.
But in a way that I don't think Tarantino's, doing that in a super overt way of, look at these dumbasses. It's obvious that the Manson family, not good. But, he's not out here just being like, look at all these girls, they're so stupid. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But he's doing it in an interesting way. When he gets punched and it cuts to all these girls just being like, I'm so sorry, I love you. It immediately, as an audience member, you're like, oh, wow, they're kind of losers.
It de-glamorizes them. It very much de-glamorizes them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the effort that's being made is that and then he forces him to fix his tire. Again, it's power fantasy. It's stuff that you can tell Tarantino was like, oh, if I had to do this, I would fucking do this and that. You know what I'm saying? And obviously it builds up to what it becomes at the end, but I think that's kind of what it's setting up.
Before we move on to Sharon Tate, who I want to talk about, we haven't touched on her at all. I really quickly want to discuss one of my favorite shots in the movie that just I have no like smart reason of why this shot is so good. It just makes me happy. It's one of those things like it's like watching Top Gun Maverick sometimes where you're just like, yeah, man, movies. And it's Brad Pitt driving down the freeway, bring a little love and da 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 da, like that song is playing.
Yeah.
And like when that music cue starts, the camera is whipping around the car in the freeway and it goes to the window and the sun's perfectly backlit. Just want to put that shot out there because when I saw that in theaters, I'm like, fucking movies, man. Like,
One of my favorite shots in this movie in particular is this is another kind of random, unexplainable shot, but it's when Al Pacino was telling the story of how him and his wife were watching it, and it cuts away to his little projection. He's like kind of scurrying in with the strings.
Dude, you don't understand how happy you made me. It's the waddle.
Yeah. It's like just seeing an old man excited to watch a couple movies with his wife.
It's also my fucking dream.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, him and his wife watch Westerns for hours while they're like smoking a cigar and having it. Like, that's like my dream. Like, in his home theater.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much love I have for you. That's your favorite shot. Like,
That's probably my favorite one. It's just so wholesome.
Al Pacino's so good in this.
Yeah, he's great. He's fantastic.
All right. We'll do more Cliff later, obviously.
Gonna transition to
Sharon Tate? Let's
Cool.
do it. Okay. Talk to me. How do you feel about Sharon Tate in this movie?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say in terms of how I feel about her in the movie because her character has so little like real involvement, but the way it moved me is very, it's a huge portion of experiencing this movie, and it's stuff that's already kind of been talked about, but I always respected though that it just took a moment to acknowledge her as a person and not just this big grisly murder victim.
I think the worst criticism that came out of this movie, and I felt like a bad misread, was just like she barely gets any lines, like, you know what I mean? And I was like, no, I mean those scenes where she's specifically that scene where she's like walking through like Bruin Theater, which I've been to that theater. I saw like Licorice Pizza there, so it's kind of fun to see it now. But where she's picking up a book for her husband, and she walks into that bookstore and immediately sees the Maltese Falcon and is like, ooh, and everything, and talks to the bookstore owner, then sees on the marquee her movie playing, and she decides to walk in.
Yeah.
What Tarantino's doing is like kind of just taking her away from what she became, which is a murder case.
Yeah.
Like, we all remember Sharon Tate with Manson, and what he's doing is taking her away from that.
Yeah.
And just being like, this was a person that had her whole career ahead of her.
Whole life, even outside of her career, just life.
Her whole life ahead of her. And I'm saying career because of how she sees herself in the movie.
Yeah.
But her whole life, and she was in general just a good person. She was a nice person. She walked into every room being excited to be there because that's how you are when you arrive in LA. And when opportunities are given to you, or like when you finally get your moments, it's like, wow, I'm here.
Yeah.
And kind of capturing that moment in time. And it's obviously such a great like comparison to what Rick is feeling. And the movie crossfades at one point from Rick to Sharon. It's a specific like tell of just like Rick's a guy who's gotten everything but is not impressed, and Sharon's just like, I'm finally getting what I want.
Well, yeah, and there's like a lot of interpretations of the movie that those three characters represent, past, present, future. That Rick is very much represents the past. He's so fixated on it, wants to reclaim his former glories and can't move on and adapt.
Yeah.
Cliff is very much in the present. He doesn't really give a shit about what happens later or what happened already. He's kind of just living in it. And then Sharon Tate's very much the future because, like you said, she has her whole life and career ahead of her and is excited for what's next.
Totally. And so it's so moving when she goes into the theater and watches herself, and it's the actual Sharon Tate.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's beautiful.
It's very much an effective kind of a eulogy for her.
But also, like, a lot of the audience members, including probably you and I, have probably never seen anything from The Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
We've probably never seen her work. Like, a lot of people have probably just know Sharon Tate as that one actress that got killed.
Who was stabbed 50 times.
Yeah, and so the fact that Tarantino's like, we're going to watch her be in The Wrecking Crew, and we're going to watch Sharon Tate be funny. and we're gonna it's gonna get laughs. And Tarantino said that. He said like the thing that I feel the most proud about is that going to screenings of this movie and seeing that not only in the movie when Wrecking Crew is being played, which Tarantino said Wrecking Crew is probably the worst movie that he's seen the most. He said it's not good, but I've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
But he said what I'm most proud of is that when that scene happens and it's Margot watching Sharon, and he said not only is in the scene in the theater people are laughing, but in the actual theater, people watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, people are laughing because of the scene that Sharon Tate's in, not just because of what's happening. But he said it's so cool to see Sharon Tate get a laugh.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that just like gets me choked up talking about it.
Yeah, and I think it's very much, again, like we've been saying, it's very much shining a light on just her life and not just her death.
Yeah,
and even outside of her career, but like you said, she was talking to people. She was experiencing just what this world had to offer. You know what I mean? Just like all of us are. You know, we all had days where we just kind of wandered around town and said hi to people.
But it's also that feeling of just like, she's like an actress that's in a movie and she's excited to see herself in a movie. Yeah. That's such a real thing.
And that, I think, that cost her life. You know what I mean? Her becoming famous. The Manson family chose her because they knew the big news that it would make.
Well, there's also this like real thing that Tarantino's trying to say of just throughout his career, interviewers, like reporters have always been like, how do you feel about violence in movies?
Yeah.
How do you feel? It's fun. Get it? You know, the classic interview.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
But
he wanted to draw a sharp line between the way we look at real life violence versus movie violence.
But it's also the way the Manson family is talking about. He's like, you know what? You know who the real criminals are? The actors that are promoting violence in movies.
Yeah.
And it's Tarantino just being like, these are murderers. They murder. It's not because of the movie. They are murderers.
Because they're fucking raging psychopaths. That's it.
Okay. So now I want to, before we get to the ending, can we just touch on one scene that I think is just like, if we don't touch on this, I would be upset with myself. I think I'm kind of proud of myself for holding back. I feel like
and we got to keep this concise. We got to keep it focused.
You want to talk about the Trudy and Rick scene?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So Rick walks onto the bad guy saloon, you know, he's got his big mustache on, the Zapata stuff.
To change up, you know, I don't want to see Jay Cahill anymore.
I want to see Caleb. Sam Wanamaker, great. Yeah. I could go on about that scene all day. But he sees young Trudy Frazier, who is like 8 years old. And she's reading a Walt Disney biography.
Yeah. And she's just going in circles around him.
This is a scene that like Tarantino's never done. Like he's never worked with child actors in this capacity, where like this child actor just takes over the scene.
Yeah,
she's in a scene with Leo and fucking steals it.
And their relationship is so believable of how intimidated he is by her.
It's the shot of both of them reading their books, and she's reading the Walt Disney biography, and he opens up the Western novel, and at first it's like backwards, so he has to like flip it.
Immediately, just the energy's there. It's set.
My favorite little moment is like when he like it has a lot of phlegm and he spits, and you just see like Trudy just being like. For listeners, I had my mouth wide open. This is like another core of just like, this is, I think through this scene and through this day, Rick learned a little bit about what it means to not be a movie star, but to be an actor.
Yeah.
Like what the art of this is.
Well, it's the thing that I might have mentioned in another podcast before, but I remember when I was listening to Armchair Expert, how Ethan Hawke was on as a guest and how he was just saying, I think it was his mom, they could be corrected down the road, but that told him basically like, if you focus too much on what you get out of your art and not what you put into it, you're going to have a hard time, basically. Yeah. And I think Rick has a similar arc. You know, he doesn't really focus on the real, like what you get out of acting and what it means to you and what the story you're part of.
Yeah. And it isn't like Trudy's right. It's not like Trudy has it all together. She's a little kid who has a kind of pretentious view on what it means to be an actor, but you got to start somewhere, and she's very steadfast on her beliefs. And maybe when she grows up, she'll learn that why was I being so like such a tight ass? But like, you got to start somewhere.
Of course. And and she's innocent.
It's that moment where she's like, and if I could be a tiny bit better, and this is the moment Tarantino cuts boom to a tight close up. I want to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the editing of cutting right to a close up at that moment.
And she's like, and we'll never achieve perfection. That's that's impossible. You always want to get as close as you can to it.
And then the all-time moment of just him explaining what he's reading.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And it's like, it's the amount of times Rick cries is my favorite. It's the thing I didn't expect in this movie. Like when we saw the trailer, we saw that tiny moment where he's like, I'm a has-been. Okay, so he's sad. Yeah. I didn't expect Rick to be crying so much.
Yeah, to have like 5 or 6 meltdown scenes the entire time.
To actually like tear up, It was so great. Because when you hear that Leonardo DiCaprio is going to play an old school movie star, you don't expect that. It's like a real subversion of like this insecure guy. And it might be the most honest depiction of what it is to be like a movie star.
To be an actor and to be, in the spotlight.
Yeah. And so and maybe the fear of losing relevancy. And it's that moment where he's talking about easy breezy. He's not as fast as he used to be. He's washed up, and then right as he starts saying it, he starts crying, and she's like, "Oh, poor Easy Breezy. I haven't even read it, and
I'm already sad."
Well, I have the quote right here.
Yeah.
Because
read it out.
She says, Trudy says, "Poor Easy Breezy. I'm practically crying, and I haven't even read it."
Why are you putting that southern drawl in her? She doesn't talk like that.
I don't know why. Okay,
try it again. Take two.
Poor Easy Breezy, I'm practically crying and I haven't even read it. And she's like kind of rubbing his knee, just ask him to be okay. And then Rick's like, about 15 years, you're going to be living it.
Yeah, I know. It's a great moment. And she's like, what? It's like,
I'll remember forever being the theater and everyone being like, oh. It cuts to the actual TV show Lancer that they're shooting. In the book, you get full Lancer chapters of like, it just suddenly becomes a Western novel in this book.
Okay, that's his way of adapting it, essentially.
It's really good. You get more of the story. But I remember in the theater, I don't know how you felt. I was kind of just like, are we in the Western right now? Like, is he just doing this?
Yeah.
This is kind of weird. Now watching, I'm having a blast. But how did you feel about it when that scene was happening?
The first time, same thing. Yeah, I was like, okay, this is dragging. It's a little weird. But I appreciate it a lot more second, third time around.
The magic of it is that Tarantino said, he was like, what I love about it is that everyone who watches it always has the same feeling. Of like, what the fuck is this shit? All right, this is a Western. I'm loving it. But like, what is this shit? Like, we're just in this scene now.
Yeah.
And slowly you get a little invested. You're like, okay, Lancer and Caleb Decatu are meeting. They're having moles and tequila. Suddenly you're invested. You're in it. And right when you're invested, that's when Rick loses it.
Yeah, that's when he misses his line, essentially.
And they had the camera squeaks back.
Yeah, and you just see like Timothy Olyphant just sitting there awkwardly waiting.
And then it cuts to the trailer, which is possibly one of Leo's best moments ever as an actor. Like him having this true breakdown.
Oh yeah, when he has like a complete freak out.
He's like, I had 8 fucking whiskey sours. Could have had 2, but I had 8.
Yeah, and he's like making fun of himself in the mirror.
He's like, I practiced my lines and now it doesn't look like I read them.
I know. Obviously, it's incredibly exaggerated for dramatic effect, but some actors and some people like are that intense.
I wouldn't doubt there's been many actors that have had that kind of meltdown in their trailers.
100%. But what's interesting though is that it's so self-focused.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just about, he's just more like embarrassed of not knowing his lines than it is of like, oh, I'm ruining the scene or I'm not there, I
think specifically though, he even says it in that whole trailer meltdown. He's like, you're going to show that director, you're going to show that little girl.
Exactly.
You can tell Trudy kind of messed with his head a little bit.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. She totally like snuck in his brain like a ninja.
Because he was coming in being like, okay, I got this ridiculous mustache. I don't want this. My hair's gone. Sure, I'll do what this director asks. And I think once he met with Trudy, immediately in his head, he's like, I gotta impress this girl.
Yeah, and he actually pushed himself to act.
Well, okay. So then you get the scene where he does the evil, sexy Hamlet.
Yeah.
Where he's like, all right, stay in it. They call cut, and he's like, that was amazing. And he's like, and by the way, Beaner Buster Bronco, where did that come from? And the line I quote to you,
You still say to me all the time to this day.
where he's just like, oh, improv. And it's like, you can tell that's his like first time doing that. Coming up with something that good.
Yeah.
And I always love those little touches of Rick being proud of himself. And like when they're watching FBI, it's like, you like the chewing gum?
Yeah. I know. He needs reassurance so much.
And then it's, again, I don't want to keep saying iconic, but in the trailer, this became the moment, right?
Of course, yeah.
When she whispers, it's like, that's the best acting I've ever seen. And he's so moved by it.
I know.
I like want to cry looking at him because I'm like, oh man, I understand. It's both hilarious and very moving.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know. The way he holds the gun up and like real tears are just there. He's like, Rick fucking Dalton. It's a great trailer moment, but it is like a really great moment in the movie,
He actually
too.
is tearing up. It's like the one moment where you feel like, man, I might be good.
Yeah.
I might be worth it in this town.
Oh, it probably gave him the confidence to start doing the Italian movies, too.
Okay, so now we can go towards the ending. Rick is coming back from Italy. Mm-hmm. And,
Yeah, they do a little time jump.
and you get to see Operation Dynamite,
Yeah.
which I want that poster so bad. Of him in like the little cab.
Those Italian Westerns do have fucking weird titles if you look at them. You
Kill
know,
the Gringo, said the Gringo, or something like that.
Directed by Antonio Margheriti. Did you catch that? That's
Inglourious
nice little-
Bastards.
Yeah.
Well, you whispered to me in the theater.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
You're like, Inglourious Bastards. I'm like, oh yeah.
Margheriti. Yeah, I think like, I don't know if you've looked into that though. Like, I remember when I was going to film school, we had to watch an Italian Western called Duck You Sucker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like they have fucking weird titles. I don't know what it is. I'm not big on the Italian Westerns.
So as they're flying back, it cuts to a shot in first class of the most beautiful drink ever made, ever shot. You know what I mean? It's like lit perfectly. I'm like, what? They spent a day getting that shot?
Yeah, my favorite Tarantino food or drink scene is probably the nachos in Death Proof.
Really?
That's probably mine, yeah.
I mean, the nachos look really good. I mean, the insert of the burger is pretty iconic.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the Big Kahuna Burger.
You know, Kurt Russell, narrator's kind of basically giving the audience some exposition on what's been going on in Italy. And there's that scene at the bar, which I love that when a door opens, it's like broad daylight.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're both like, Cliff is wearing a Rick Dalton wig. And they're both talking, and he's just like, I might have to sell the house. He's like, but I don't think I can afford you anymore. I think this might be the end of the road. Cliff, in classic Cliff fashion, he's like, that's a good plan.
Yeah, he doesn't even take it personally. He's like, oh, that makes sense.
And they basically said like they're going to be their last night together. And the narrator says, when you come to the end of the line with a buddy who is more than a brother and a little less than a wife, getting blind drunk together is really the only way to say farewell.
Yeah.
And I don't know, fucking one of the best montages in Tarantino's career starts.
Yeah. It's like almost feels like Scorsese-like.
You're out of time.
Yeah.
Like, it's a song that Tarantino said, he was like, I was worried that song might be a little too on the money.
Too obvious, too a low-hanging fruit.
Because he said that the way he likes to use music in movies, he tries not to be too on the money. Like, he tries not to be like the most obvious song, you know?
Yeah, which is fair, but I think at that point it feels pretty earned,
It's earned, and it's also, it's sad. Like, when that montage of, like, especially when it cuts to Sharon being pregnant, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
When it does that whip pan, and she's pregnant, all, like, happy, and she's super pregnant. And, but then there's that montage. Like, I already mentioned Cliff literally carrying Rick's load. Cliff getting Brandy.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about. Brandy's great.
Yeah. Oh, no. Brandy's probably my favorite movie dog.
One of the great movie dogs.
No, the great movie dog.
Yeah, the great movie
Just to be
dog.
clear.
You also know, watching this movie for the first time, you're waiting for the scene.
Yeah.
You're waiting for Cielo Drive.
The elephant in the room is that.
And now when that song plays and Sharon's pregnant, you're like, oh, it's about to happen.
Yeah.
It's about to happen. And they get super fucking drunk, leave the El Coyote, and which I passed recently, by the way. I was in an Uber, and I'm like, oh, that's where they had their last drink.
Yeah, then meanwhile, Sharon Tate and her friends are at Casa Vega, which I've never been to.
And the narrator's saying there's like, she felt this deep sense of like melancholy. She was feeling like really pregnant, you know?
Yeah.
And kind of going through a little bit what everyone was doing that night. This person had a joint, fell asleep. This person watched TV, fell asleep.
Yeah, it almost has kind of a crew A true crime documentary feel.
I've never seen you shut off like that.
Sometimes you just have to just take a second and be like, okay.
You like had prayer hands up. You were like, I'm sorry.
But yeah, it has kind of a true crime documentary vibe where he's like walking you through, and you can tell it's probably historically accurate. I haven't verified it, but it probably is.
It feels like someone's reading off a document.
Exactly.
It's very well done. Cliff and Rick are really drunk, come home, and I love how Rick comes home, immediately starts making himself margaritas.
I know, that frozen blended margarita that he's like drinking straight out of the pitcher. I'm like, good for you, man.
Also, he has this like bad hairdo.
Yeah.
And Cliff is like, all right, let's go for a walk. And he takes the acid dip cigarette, smokes it, and it's the classic, and away we go.
Yeah.
And again, but like when he says away we go, it's also a moment in the theater where you're kind of like your heart's beating. You're just like,
Yeah.
oh, fuck, it's happening. And then you see as he's walking away, the cars are coming in.
Yep.
And then the moment I feel like that everyone laughed and we all in the theater collectively realized what was going to happen, and Tarantino was about to do the thing that he's done in the past, he was about to do it again, is when they're about to go into the gate where to Sharon Tate's house.
Yeah.
And Rick comes out, he's like, oh, fucking hippies, I got this property. And he comes out in a robe, drunk as hell, being like, hey.
Yeah, and he just full on screams him. And you could see even Austin Butler starting to get a pistol out, and he yells at him again.
It kind of scares him. Yeah. And then I think like we all were like, oh, fuck, he's doing it again. This is not going to go the way we think it's going to go.
100%. Yeah, I know. And then as soon as...
Well, I want to say really quickly, when they're in the car, this is another moment that you specified about how he like de-glamorizes the Manson family. How they're in the car and they're immediately like, was that Rick Dalton? Yeah. And Austin Butler does it brilliant. It's like, when I was a kid, I had a Rick Dalton lunchbox. That was my favorite out of all my lunchboxes.
J.K. Hill just yelled at me?
He's like a fan.
I know.
By the way, Maya Hawke is in that scene. She's the one that runs away. She kind of dips, remember? Yeah. Also great that Maya Hawke's in it because it's just like Uma Thurman's daughter and Tarantino's working with her. It's kind of brilliant.
Yeah, well, I mean, and historically too, I think I want to say she was the one who confessed the most in, when they were all arrested.
Interesting.
And like she waited outside on guard and was the one who was most disturbed by what they did. So I think that was Tarantino's way of addressing her role in it. By after they get yelled at by DiCaprio, she became more uneasy and decided to just ditch the whole thing.
Yeah, totally. One of my favorite lines while they're in the car of just like, you don't know bounty law? Yeah. And she's like, sorry, I don't watch every fascist on TV.
I know. But yeah, then they come up with this big plan to, hang on, let's derail this. Let's kill these people instead. Basically, let's kill Rick and Cliff,
the real criminals.
Yeah, the people who we grew up watching kill people on TV, and now we're giving it to them. That's kind of their mentality.
Meanwhile, Cliff and Brandy are just walking back.
He's just high as a kite, tripping on acid.
And like he does the like, hey, you stay there. We've seen the scene with him making mac and cheese, training Brandy really well.
Yeah.
That scene's doing so much, right? It's showing like, okay, this guy lives a simple life. He lives right by the Regency Drive-In.
Which, even speaking thematically too, again, another in a trailer park right outside of the drive-in.
But it's set up in that scene that Brandy's super well trained.
Yeah.
And when he started trying to get the food for Brandy, he suddenly realized how high he is. The funniest thing is when he turns on the light, he's like, yeah. Bad idea. Rick's in the pool, just waiting in the pool with his like margarita.
Well, he has his headphones and he's singing to himself too.
I think like this scene was, we all knew it was coming when we were watching it. We're like, okay, it's a Tarantino movie. It has to end with a bloodbath.
Yeah.
Like, we knew it was coming, but it's still such a shocker the way he fucks them up.
Oh, I know. And that's when he goes maximum wish fulfillment of, like, the way you wish it could have gone. That cinematic justice almost.
And Tex says the line where he's like, I'm the devil.
And I'm here to do his business.
He's like, no, it was dumber than that. When he's trying to think of his name, it was Tex.
Because he really did say that.
Well, I know. Yeah. That's what makes it brilliant, that immediately Cliff is like undercutting it. He's like, it's dumber than that.
Yeah. Well, and obviously like the shot, and you touched on it earlier about when they're, when Cliff is aiming his finger gun while Tex is aiming his real gun.
Yeah.
People have looked at that symbolically too.
Reality and fiction.
Exactly. Like the fictional character versus the real, using a fake gun versus a real gun.
The shot that I just think is like brilliant, like comedic acting by Brad Pitt, is when he starts laughing and his eyes like are popping out.
I know. It's just crazy too how much he like fucks them up while he's high too. You just know if he wasn't, it would have been a lot shorter.
And then he does that.
Yeah.
Brandy just goes for Austin Butler's crotch.
Yeah.
It's like
Well, he goes for his hand first because.
Oh, is this his hand?
Yeah,
first?
the crotch comes later because basically he's holding the gun and he loads the gun. He cocks the pistol, and that's what makes Brad Pitt signal for Brandy to attack him. Yeah, he bites his hand first, and he's biting him, and then there's like one specific moment when he bites his crotch, and you get an insert of Austin Butler like going, ah! Like just screaming his head off.
When one of them like knifes his hip. And he sees like the little knife and touches it, looks at her, grabs her head, and it cuts to him smashing it against the phone.
Right on the corner of the fireplace, just again and again and again.
And at first you're just like, okay, he smashed her head. And then he takes her by the phone and smashes her more. And I remember there was this weird discourse online about just like, I can't believe Tarantino just filmed a scene of a guy beating up women like that. I'm like, it was the fucking Manson family.
Yeah, that's just, to me, I'm like, that's not even worth acknowledging, right? Because like
they were the man.
They deserved worse than what they got in the movie.
Y'all know what they did? Like, anyways.
They killed a pregnant woman who was like weeks away from giving birth.
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
my
there's
God.
nothing you could do in a movie that would offend me when they get bad things happening to them.
It's Mikey Madison's character. She's like, she's all fucked up from the like wolf's tooth can that was thrown at her face. And everything.
Oh, I know. Well, that was my favorite moment too, when she just runs at him with the knife and he just throws the can right in at her face. It's like, and then he just politely just signals for Brandy, like, okay, switch, get her now.
She just like is screaming, going all out, slams through the door, and Rick Dalton's just on a pool, oblivious to it all.
He's just in his own world, like, what the fuck?
And of course, people. We'll get to this, but immediately jumps out the pool, and she's in there. Cliff's kind of just unconscious now. You think he's dead for a second.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because he got shot and he just collapsed.
Yeah, and he walks out, and then this is a moment in the theater that I'll remember for probably the rest of my life, where you saw earlier in the movie where he was burning those Nazis alive with that flamethrower, how he says he still has that flamethrower.
Yeah.
And then he comes out and they play the 14 Fists of McCluskey, not the 14 Fists, I think it's the 14.
I think it was that one, yeah.
They play the 14 Fists of McCluskey music. Because there's a music to that. They play that music as he's walking out. You remember, in the theater, we all cheered. We were all like, oh!
He's about to burn her alive. Hell yeah.
And they do, there's that wide shot of him burning her, and it just crash zooms onto her, and it's like, there's nothing like I can say smart about the scene besides the fact that it was another one of those moments where I'm like, fucking movies.
Well, yeah, and I think they're still smart because
it's the obvious,
yeah, because it's his own movie that he's reliving. He's reliving his glory days, kind of, but in a relevant way.
But also, it's the thing that a lot of people have pointed out, that it's stuntman and movie star. Cliff does all the work.
Yep.
He gets hurt. Rick gets the hero shot.
He gets the hero shot, and then he's also the one after the fact that gets to talk to all the celebrities,
Yeah. And some of like Brad Pitt's best work, and when he's relaying the story to the police officers, and there was this one guy who said, "I'm here, the devil, and here to do some devil shit."
Yeah, he didn't know what they wanted. He's like,
again, undercutting the Manson myth of like what they said and how evil it sounded, and I was just like, they were just dumb,
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest thing that I love about this movie is that it doesn't overlook into what they said, what it all meant, and their philosophy, what it says about our society, or any of that shit.
It doesn't do the Netflix true crime shit.
Yeah.
Not at all. That's not what it's interested in. And I mean, this is a moment that I think my most recent watch, I kind of teared up. Jay Sebring. He's like, hey, what the hell was that?
Yeah, he's like, what the fuck happened over there?
By the way, that's such a real LA thing of just like when something's crazy's happening on the street, it's like some random stranger's like, what was that? And then you start talking to them about it. I just had that experience so many times that like the way Jay Sebring says that line is great. He asks, is everyone okay? I was like, well, the fucking hippies aren't.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then I burned one of them to crisp and everything. And then Jay's like, oh, the flame from 14 Fists of McCluskey.
Yeah, immediately he recognized it.
And he's like, Yeah. Like, and it's just that moment that the entire time Rick's been thinking, these people, I gotta introduce myself to them. I live right next to them. Who knows what
Yeah,
happened?
he saw himself as like just a relic, basically.
And this guy remembered him.
He was a fan.
He
Yeah.
watched his TV show, you know? I mean, hell, even Tex from the Manson family was like, I love that show. It's like,
Yeah.
Rick doesn't know, like, how, like, he had a successful TV show.
He impacted people.
Not many people get to have that, you know? I mean, the amount of times that I've, like, thought to myself, I'm like, well, I make movie reaction videos. Those are, like, easy to make. I'm not making art. I'm not making these, like, you know, these things that, even though, like, I put so much work into them, you and I put so much work into them, sometimes I undercut it. And you've been really good about just being like, man, you know how many people really enjoy watching us? You know how many people love watching us? And that's a great part of their day, you know? And that's like the scene where Jay's like telling Rick, and it's both funny to see how Rick is like so happy about that.
Yeah.
But also very touching.
Yeah, it is. And I think like it just adds the more kind of sense of sadness about it, you know, just knowing that like just you just want to play it out in your head like this is history and it's still, you know what I mean?
It's the fairy tale aspect of it, of when it cuts to the intercom and it's Sharon's voice.
Exactly, yeah.
And
then,
you hear is like, are you okay? And I was like, oh man.
yeah.
Especially when he gets invited in, the gates open for him, he invited in, and you see Sharon in the blue jersey.
Yeah.
And seeing her hug Rick and bring her in, and then slowly the title pops in of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, ... That's like it's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And in your
Once upon a time.
and in your mind, you're just like, I wish it played out this way.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Once upon a time, the bad guys got their comeuppance.
Brad Pitt said it perfectly when he won his Oscar. He's like, sometimes I wish life was like Tarantino movies where the good guys win at the end.
Yeah.
And you think back and you're like, yeah, he's always done that.
Yeah. I know. Just watching Sam Jackson and Django getting shot in the kneecaps.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to do this podcast because I felt like I've always wanted to express that this movie's more than just a great Tarantino movie to me. It actually hits me emotionally in a way that I love all of Tarantino movies. And yes, I think Pulp Fiction is probably his best work, yada, yada, yada. But like, I watch all of Tarantino movies of like, wow, this is so much fun. And like, it's so impressive. And this is the best writing I've ever seen. And I kind of watch it with a little bit of like distance, not in a bad way. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like I'm so invested and I see myself in this movie in a way that I wouldn't expect because it's about an aging TV star.
Yeah, and it's universal because anyone can kind of apply it to their lives. Because because you and I are kind of in our LA bubble, right? You and I are creators. We know other influencers and up and coming actors, yada yada.
Well, that's key too. Living in LA makes this movie better too.
Exactly. But I will say, outside of all of that, to the LA bubble, I think anyone can connect to it on the level of feeling like your life hasn't amounted to enough, even though it very clearly has.
Yeah.
And that's a universal message. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life tackles that. That's the entire movie, you know, without any LA shit in it. But it has the same, like, core to it.
Yeah. Can't wait to do a podcast on It's a Wonderful Life.
We will get to that one. Make no mistake.
So, to end this episode, I want to do something. If you'll allow me. But it's the part of the final chapter of the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood book.
Okay.
And I think this, he ends it differently in the book. He doesn't end it with the scene in the movie. That scene in the movie actually happens earlier in the book, funny enough. They shot this scene that I'm about to read in the movie, but they cut it out. As you can see in the back of the book, and as viewers might be able to see, Leo's on a phone call with Trudy.
Okay.
You can tell that they shot the scene, but he cut it out.
Got it.
So Leo one night after, he got done shooting on Lancer. He comes home and he had a great day. He went out drinking with Timothy Olyphant's character at a bar too. That was a whole scene.
Okay.
But he comes home kind of drunk and he gets a phone call. And he's like, who the fuck is calling right now? And he gets a phone call from Trudy. He's like, hey, do you know your lines for tomorrow? And because they did the scene that we saw in the movie, but they were going to shoot another scene the next day.
Got it. Yeah, the episode wasn't done.
And he's like, you shouldn't be calling me. Does your mom know about this? Because it's like an 8-year-old's calling this fucking old dude. And she just starts laughing. It's like, my mom's like on her way to getting drunk and falling asleep on the TV until the national anthem wakes her up. So it's fine. And he's like, this is inappropriate. And it's just like, come on, we're actors. We got to work this out. I like to know my lines cold. I don't believe in the learning your lines on the day malarkey. She says that.
Yeah, yeah.
And they go through their lines. And Rick actually gets invested. Like, he pretends to get shot and he's in his kitchen. And Trudy's like, what happened? He's like, I pretended to get shot, so I'm by like my fridge right now. And like he like really gets into it. And Trudy says, he's like, we're gonna kill this tomorrow. Like, we're doing really good. And Trudy has a moment, and I'm just gonna read this. Trudy says, wow, Rick, isn't our job great? We're so lucky, ain't we? And then it says, and for the first time in 10 years, Rick realizes how fortunate he is and was. All the wonderful actors he's worked with through the years, and they list off a bunch of actors, all the different actresses he got to kiss, all the affairs he had, all the interesting people he got to work with, all the places he got to visit, all the fun stories he got to live, all the times he saw his name and picture in the papers and magazines, all the nice hotel rooms, all the fuss people made over him, all the fan mail he never read, all the times driving through Hollywood as a citizen in good standing. He looks around at the fabulous house he owns, paid for by doing what he used to do for free when he was a little boy, pretending to be a cowboy. Then he tells Trudy, yes, we are, Trudy. We're really lucky. His little scene partner bids him good night. Good night, Caleb. See you tomorrow. And a very grateful Rick Dalton says, good night, Marabella. See you tomorrow. And the next day on the 20th Century Fox backlot, on the set of Lancer, the two actors knocked him dead. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's great Tarantino writing, but it's also like sentimental in a way that like Tarantino didn't get to in the movie, but that sentiment is basically in that final scene where he gets invited into the house, you know?
Yeah, the energy's still there, for sure.
I just love that moment. What gets me is that, and to realize all the times he was in Hollywood as a citizen in good standing. That's the line that gets me. It's just that, like, I'm alive. I'm in Hollywood. I live here.
Yeah, and I think what touches me just hearing it for the first time is also him saying what he used to do for free.
As a kid, be a TV,
Yeah,
be a cowboy.
For me personally with videos, even before you and I did Nice Dude for free, doing random short films and shit, I did random little skits when I was 12. I used to film that stuff. I used to learn how cameras work. I used to, mess around. My camera had like a 3D effect on the viewfinder.
Well, both the things that I think bonded you and me is that we both had YouTube channels when we were like kids.
Yeah.
And we both like made videos that no one watched.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's, what we're talking about is applicable to anyone who's in any artistic field, whether it's music or whatever else you're into, acting, any of that. I think there is a relationship with it that changes when you start doing it for work.
Yeah.
And it's important to remind yourself, like, oh, I am actually getting something real out of this.
Yeah, man. This movie rules. This movie rules. All right. To officially end this podcast, as I said, I was gone for 2 weeks on vacation. I was in Dubai, by the way. It was fantastic. And last year, I went to Dubai for the first time. And my parents basically wanted to go this year because they loved it. And last year when I went to Dubai for the first time, I came back with a gift for you. I'll pop up the picture here. It was a mug that was basically a camel.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I loved it. And this year when I was in Dubai, I was like, what gift should I get you? And I saw a mug that had a camel on it. It was a different mug.
Okay, another camel mug.
And I was like, I told my mom, I was like, I'm going to get this for Chris. It'll be funny. And my mom looked at me. She was like, just get him like a normal like mug. Like, why are you doing this again? And so I ended up not doing it, listening to my mom. Because I was like, okay, maybe it's okay to be sincere for a second. But I got you a little gift. It's just a regular Dubai souvenir mug.
Oh, thanks, man. Oh, that's really nice.
Also, Chris collects mugs, guys. Like, he has like one of the best collections of mugs ever, in my opinion. You do. You have some amazing mugs.
I appreciate that, man. This is, I'll hold it up right here. I mean, it's going to be out of focus probably, but
yeah. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much to our patrons for supporting us again and again. We really appreciate you. Last but not least, stay nice, dudes.